actually worked. I went to cancel a doctor's appointment and they said it was a $200 charge without a week's notice. I asked how much it was to reschedule. They said it was free. Okay. So I need to reschedule for 2 weeks out. Is 3 weeks okay? Yep. Alright. You're all set for 3 weeks from now. Anything else I can do for you? Yes. I need to cancel my appointment. We need a week's notice. My appointment is 3 weeks away. Oh. Okay. Sure. Thank you. Couldn't believe it worked. Edit. Well. Crap. My most upvoted comment is a story about me conning some poor receptionist. I'm a schmuck. They lost in their own game. Mayo, good job, man. I'll try this if something like this happens to me. Thanks. As others have mentioned, the same thing works with hotels. It also works with internet companies. 2-year contract with Comcast. They tell me I have to pay an early termination fee. You can upgrade internet speeds and choose a new package without a contract. Then cancel. Worked for me. My stepdad was taking a sat-nav back to the shop as it was acting strange, but the bloke serving him refused to take it as the warranty only covers physical damage, not accidental damage, so he just drop-kicked it lightly and the bloke just casually said that'll do sir and went out back to get a replacement. Wasn't too sure what to think about that. It's simple. The shop assistant gets paid enough to be there and has to explain himself to other people if the rules aren't followed exactly. But I isn't paid enough to actually care. My folks were in town. And my wife and I wanted to take them to dinner. We head to a nearby mediocre steakhouse at the request of my parents. And it's around 6 p.m. The hostesses tell us there's a minimum 45-minute wait. I get suspicious, as their parking lot had barely any cars. So I peek around into their dining area. There are several open tables that would fit a party of 4. Mildly annoyed, I ask the hostesses why we can't be seated at any of these tables. They reply that they're being held for future reservations. I get on my smartphone, open the Open Table app, make a reservation for 6:15 p.m. for a party of 4. And we're seated immediately. I've had that happen before too. But after booking my reservation I went somewhere else to eat. Cause duck that bullshit. This was before high-speed internet. We had to transfer a database between 2 cities 500 kilometers apart and we had only one night to do it. People started searching how to compress the files and rent several expensive digital lines, I think ISPN, to spread the copy. Then someone said why don't we remove the hard drive out of the server and move it there by car? So I drove 500 kilometers during the night to deliver the disk and mount the new database. Never underestimate the bandwidth of a station wagon full of tape circling down the highway. Computer networks. 3rd ed. p. 83. Paraphrasing Dr. Warren Jackson. Director. University of Toronto Computing Services, UTCS, circa 1985. I was working as a paramedic at a music festival when we got called to a kid tripping on acid. The guy had climbed to the top of a portable generator stadium light. So he's 20 feet in the air, on a light pole staring into this blazing midnight sun screaming, "I'm a moth, go into the flame." We had several cops, firefighters and myself standing at the base for 30 minutes discussing how to get him down without killing him or us. The entire time a crowd of people on drugs is surrounding us to see how it all plays out. Do we get a ladder truck and try to coax him down? What if he won't go? Do we spray mace up there? What if he falls? All of a sudden this greasy looking janitor walks up, turns off power to the generator, turns on his flashlight and aims it at the Mothman. Dude looks at the flashlight on the ground, scambles down and follows it to the medical rent like a puppy about to get a snack. I'm embarrassed that none of us thought about that. I called about a pothole at the entrance of my store. They said since it was in my entrance, I'd have to pay for it. I called back as a concerned citizen and it'll be fixed in 72 hours. There was a nursing home in Germany and the patients with dementia kept wandering off. They installed a fake bus stop in front of the nursing home so when dementia and patients got out of the building, they would go sit at the fake bus stop and wait for the non-existent bus. The bus stop was clearly visible from the main offices. So whenever staff saw someone out there, they would just go and retrieve them. Solved the problem completely. Dementia wards in hospitals in New England, USA, are pretty common to have something like a bookcase painted over the doors to prevent the same sort of thing. Edit. No, it's not a fire hazard. Any mentally competent person can discern it as a door. I'm not sure if they have any moments of lucidity, is that the word? But realizing that you're in a room with no door, along with a bus that never comes. Dates that skip entire years with no one to explain why. Sounds like some Lovecraftian SCP nightmare. Our family cat hated our family dog. Rubbed the dog all over with fresh catnip. New best friends. And here I am now, wondering if I could befriend a lion doing this. Next year's Darwin Award nominee right here. I once owned a Subaru and drove a half hour away to a friend's house. On the way home, the brakes lost all their fluid. When I stepped on the brake pedal, the car just coasted. This was in the middle of a blizzard. Nobody else was on the road. So in my head, it made the most logical sense to drive it home right then and there, rather than wait for a tow truck during a blizzard. I took back roads and stayed in first or second gear, 20 miles per hour at most, and braked to a stop with the emergency brake. It was really easy in retrospect. Dumb, but easy. That's why it's called an emergency brake. It relies on a cable, so when your car's hydraulic brake system fails, you can still slow to stop. Takes a lot longer. Only pointing this out because I've actually heard people say they thought emergency brake meant use in case of emergency, like, you hop, an accident happened in front of me and I need stop instantly, pulley brake. That's how you escalate emergencies. Back when I was in 6th form at school, we had new sofas in the common room, a room where our year could hang out and relax, work, listen to music on our time off. They had been there only a couple of days before one of the legs snapped off one of the sofas. Now we could have attempted to fix it, or just left it missing a leg, but there were often checks and cleaners moving furniture would have noticed it was broken and we would have got in trouble for not respecting school property. So we did the only sensible thing, which was break all the legs off the sofa, and then all the sofas in the room so they were all at the same height. We stashed the legs in the ceiling, and nobody knew a thing. A few years ago I worked at a US Airways contract where a lot of the baggage handlers were guys fresh out of high school. Picture in your mind the assortment of rapscallions and buffoons you hung out with at that age. Now put that rambunctious crew in charge of a bunch of airplanes. Those are the characters in this story. One day two of them were playfully wrestling each other in the break room. It quickly came to an end when one guy got slammed into the wall and left a huge, human-sized dent in the drywall. It was a weekend, so management wasn't around, which meant they had to hide the damage in order to escape punishment. The wall they dented had a rather large, old corkboard on it. This corkboard was probably 5 feet tall and 8 feet long, and had clearly been affixed to the wall for years. They decided to move the corkboard to cover the hole. Now, if you saw the setup of the room, you'd know this was the dumbest solution you could dream up. The corkboard was centered on the wall, with a few feet of blank wall space on both the left and right sides. But the dent was all the way to the right of the wall, in the empty wall space between the corkboard and the main entrance. To move the corkboard to cover the hole, they had to shift it down and to the right a few feet. Not inches. Feet. The repositioned corkboard almost covered the light switch, and exposed a giant, white imprint of where the corkboard used to be. If Stevie Wonder walked into that room he'd say, "Someone has clearly moved that corkboard." Monday comes and goes, and no one in charge notices that the corkboard had been moved. We were second shift, so we assumed when we showed up there would be lots of questions. But there were none. It was business as usual. I honestly expected that they were going to move the corkboard and find another hole already behind it. Nurses here will recognize this one. Once I was dealing with an extremely agitated and fearful Alzheimer's patient who had been sundowning since 3 p.m. Sundowning is an occurrence in some Alzheimer's patients where their mental function gets worse and worse as the day goes on once it starts to get dark. In a hoe, this sweet old lady was having an absolute fit. All through my shift, night shift yay, I was running in and out of her room. The bed alarm kept going off. She was so confused. Afraid. I desperately wanted her to go to sleep. Mind you, I had 7 other patients. I finally walk her out to the nurse's station and plop her down in a seat next to me while I do my charting. She is yelling at me and throwing things. I've had it at this point and I'm running out of ideas. I finally look at her and say, how will I ever finish with a wash? My husband will be so mad when he gets home. Would you help me finish? She looks me right in the eye, clear as day, and says, damn it sister, don't you ever learn? Give me that laundry. Haha, so I grab a stack of folded towels and mess them up real quick and plop them in front of her. She folded all of them. I would say, oh look at that. She turned around and I would mess the towels up again. This went on a few times until this sweet lady just passed out. Exhausted from being so worked up earlier, and maybe from all the towel folding. I slowly push her in the desk chair down the hall and gently get her back into bed. She started to wake up and I leaned down and whispered, all the wash is done. You have nothing else to worry about. She slept throughout the night. We were both happy. I am the grandma whisperer. My dad used to be a nurse. He said that saying shh, the baby's sleeping works 90% of the time on Alzheimer's patients. My brother's Mill has Alzheimer's and she would throw a huge fit over cigarettes and I finally broke and yelled at her. Susan. Be calm now. Caroline is asleep. It had a calming effect on her almost immediately. She sat down on the patio in her favorite rocking chair and smoked that entire cigarette with a smile. Not a care in the world. Dudes pissing absolutely everywhere in the bathroom where I once worked. So the janitor put a little red sticker in each toilet and suddenly the problem stopped. Apparently men will aim at a target 100% of the time. If a target is presented. I don't remember where. But in some European city they fixed the cigarette end problem by creating an ashtray with 2 boxes. And a question. Who's the best soccer player? On one box there was Messi and on the other one Ronaldo. I remember it worked pretty well. That's why a lot of urinal brands have their logo in them. Guys will aim at the target. Though. On the subject of urinals and ideas. Who thought these waterless urinals were a good idea? They're great for about a year. But then they get clogged up with piss and calcium. And the whole bathroom smells like stale urine. I read this somewhere so I'm not sure if it's true, but an airport was having complaints that luggage was taking too long to get to baggage claim. The airport solution was to move baggage claim even farther away from the gates. The complaint stopped because a lot of the time spent waiting was now spent just walking there. The actual time it took to get your luggage wasn't any faster. My first vehicle was a 1985 Dodge Ram that had around 300k miles on it. Needless to say, it wasn't exactly reliable. Anyway, my friend and I had tickets to go see a concert in a city that was about 3 hours away. We made it there just fine and had a blast at the concert. We couldn't afford to stay overnight so we started on the long journey home. If all went well, we would get home around 3 AM. There was one stretch of highway where there was 60-ish miles between towns. It's pretty much the worst place to break down on that journey. There were big signs warning travelers to fill up with gas before leaving town. But I had half a tank. My truck sputtered out and died almost halfway between the 2 towns. It sure sounded like I ran out of gas, but the gauge still showed half a tank. All had not gone well. So there we were 1:45 AM. Stuck on the side of the highway in Texas. 30 miles from the nearest towns. No moonlight. And this was before teenagers had cell phones. We were screwed. After a bit of poking around with a flashlight, we discovered that we did have fuel, but the fuel pump had died. We decided to sleep in the truck and mess with it in the morning. On those old Dodge trucks, the fuel pump was inside the engine instead of in the fuel tank like a modern vehicle. It was powered by the engine instead of an electric motor. Essentially, the fuel pump would constantly pump gasoline when the engine was running and gas would always be available for the carburetor float valve. The extra pumped gas would just go back into the gas tank. I got in my truck, hit the windshield fluid lever, and the truck started right up. It took a bit of trial and error, but I was able to get the timing down where I knew how often to hit the lever to keep the truck running. We made it back home just after 4:30 AM. My dad wasn't immediately amused with my handiwork. But he told all of his friends how clever his son was, so I guess it passed the dad test. This is amazing. Tapping on the guidance computer during the Apollo 11 moon landing. At the refinery where I work, we call this an instrument calibration tap. It fixes things more often than you could imagine. Jeb. The guidance computer isn't working. Just slap it around a little, Bill. That always works. An officially recommended solution to a common problem with the Apple III was to lift the computer 2 inches and drop it. I did this and had it work. Owner of the machine never called me to do tech work again, but still admits it worked. I like to believe that they never called you because they concluded that lifting technology 2 inches and dropping it was the solution to all tech problems, and so easy they could do it themselves. And so, to this day, they're dropping their iPads and iPhones. Possibly from ever increasing heights and the belief that the higher something is, the more likely it is to fix the problem. I'm really late to this. But, in my ecology class we learned about how there's a snake problem in Guam. Particularly, brown tree snakes. The solution? Dropping dead mice laced with Tylenol attached to tiny streamer cardboard parachutes. Tylenol is poisonous to the snakes and the streamers attract their attention. It worked. The snakes ate the mice and it mitigated the snake problem that was affecting the native bird species. I was tested on this in my final exam. I like to imagine that for your test you were given a piece of fabric, some string, a box of Tylenol and a dead mouse. Several months ago I was working in an ICU when a pipe burst in the ceiling and began to leak into my patient's room. The supervisor's solution was move him into the hall. However, that would have killed this particular patient. Thankfully, it had been a rainy weekend. So I propped my umbrella up on the patient and the water ran off harmlessly into the floor. The surgeon had a tiny heart attack when he saw it a bit later. But he got over it, I suppose. Probably in the right place for heart attack anyhow. The surgeon had a tiny heart attack when he saw it a bit later. Ooh. I know what to do. Move him into the hall. We had a problem with an order, so I wrote an email from my email address to customer support asking them on how to proceed. They told me that since the order was done in my girlfriend's name they couldn't give me this information for privacy reasons. So I just replied, still from my email address, with regards. Apparently that was proof enough for them to give me said information, which actually was just to call a certain number. Why that information fell under their privacy policy in the first place is still a mystery to me. Similar scenario, me. I need to pay a bill for my wife. Support. And what is yours, me? Support. You are not on the account, so I cannot take payment. Hang up and immediately call back. Get the same support person, me. Hello, my name is wife's unisex name, and I would like to make a payment. Support. Hello, wife's unisex name. No problem. Can I get the name on the credit card, me? Payment made. Edit. Formatting edit to change the gender wife name to wife's unisex name. I never understood this. Why do you need to be on the account to make a payment? I understand to see records, see balances, etc. But if anybody wants to call to make payments on my student loan account, please do. Wrapping your Xbox 360 in a towel and leaving it turned on caused some of the shit connections on wiring to resolder themselves if you had the ring of death. Something daft like that anyway. I fixed the HDMI ports on one of my TVs by baking the motherboard in the oven. Yeah. When the towel trick stopped working on my 360, I started to put it in the oven for a bit instead. Had to send in a letter once. The envelopes had no sticky adhesive and couldn't find the tape at home. My dad, who's pretty much as old as Confucius, just grabbed a grain of rice out of my bowl and used it as the adhesive. It worked so well. Edit. Since people keep asking, it was just cooked white rice I was eating for dinner. Believe it or not, this was a standard practice in India a few decades ago. 1 cup of rice every day during the kite season. Good times. There is a retaining wall in my backyard. The neighbor's yard is about 3 feet higher than my own. And the retaining wall is right on the property line. The wall was looking really shabby when I first moved in. So I asked the neighbor if he'd like to go halves on fixing it. I wanted something less ugly in my yard and I assumed he wanted to keep his yard out of mine. Dude refused and flipped the duck out. He insisted it was my wall, not his. The city disagreed and that I needed to duck right off. So I told him that if he felt the wall was mine I'd be taking it down. He flips me the bird. Nice. 2 weeks later I have a contractor coming to give me an estimate on some foundation repair work. Nothing major. Some carbon fiber reinforcements to be added. I was also breaking up a small concrete slab on the side of my house not facing this neighbor. So the contractor arrives. I go to greet him in the backyard with a sledgehammer over my shoulder. We had some brief discussions outside. Went inside and he did his thing. Then we talked for a while outside a bit longer. All the while I'm holding this stupid sledgehammer. Neighbor comes over 15 minutes later and is seriously freaked out because he assumed that I was about to take down the wall and was hiring this guy for, well, something related. He agrees to get the wall repaired at his expense because he really doesn't want me to demo the wall. Bought a not chargeable iPhone 5s from a second-hand store for bargain. Used a toothpick to clean the contact. Phone is chargeable now and works perfectly. Similarly, my friend was gonna throw away his old iPod mini because it didn't work anymore and he had a new one. So I asked for it and he gave it to me. Swapped out the charging cable for another cable and it worked. The only broken thing was the original charger. I offered it back to him since it was never really broken. But he was kind and let me keep it since he already had a new one. I am dealing with something similar now. My cousin offered me an iPad because the screen was broken and it wouldn't charge. Used my charger and it fired right up. Bought a replacement screen. Now he wants it back once I fix it. I told him I wasn't comfortable with possibly breaking it since he wanted it back, but he told me it didn't matter. Now my thought is, if you don't care if it breaks, why would you want it back? Edit. Dang. You're cold as ice. I would normally agree with your advice, but he's done me a solid a time or two, so I'm just going to fix it and chalk it up to payback. Doesn't mean I like the situation any more than any of you. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for 3 videos a day.